The Battle of Newton was a minor skirmish that took place in the small town of Newton, Alabama, on the 14th of March 1865, during the final days of the U.S. Civil War. It was fought between local Home Guard troops and elements of the 1st Florida Cavalry, who had invaded the Wiregrass region of Alabama in violation of a directive given by Brigadier General Alexander Asboth, commanding Union forces in Pensacola, Florida, led by 2nd Lieutenant Joseph Sanders, a former captain in the Confederate Army who had switched sides and joined with the Federals. The Floridians intended to burn the courthouse of Dale County, which was then located in Newton, as had been done in other nearby counties during this same period of time. However, their movement toward the town was detected by local citizens, and they were ambushed and routed on the town square by Newton's Home Guard before they could do any damage. Sanders reported 3 dead and 5 wounded, while no casualties were reported among the Home Guard troops. Background: an area of relatively low population and economic importance in antebellum Alabama, Dale County had been relegated to the status of a backwater during the Civil War era, largely neglected by the state government in Montgomery, mostly covered by pine forest and with few big farms or plantations. The area proved an attractive gathering location for deserters from the Confederate Army, as well as Southern Unionists who had been harassed or worse by their secession neighbors. These bushwhackers, as they were called, hid out in the forests of Dale and adjacent counties, seeking aid and supplies from federal forces in Pensacola, or, more often than not, simply seizing them from the largely defenseless locals. One bushwhacker leader was Joseph G. Sanders, a millwright and resident of Dale County who had first served as a private in the 31st Georgia Infantry before being elected captain of Company C in that regiment. In 1864, Sanders had resigned his commission, facing the possibility of being drafted to fight for the South as a private. He chose to go over to the Union side, where he was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant and assigned to Company F, 1st Regiment of Florida Cavalry. Sanders' unit attracted not just Confederate deserters and local Unionists, but also outright criminals and other less than desirable elements, as well. In the late winter of 1865, Brigadier General Alexander Asboth, commanding federal forces in the Florida Panhandle, ordered Sanders to make a raid into Washington County, Florida, to raise recruits and also to confiscate horses and cattle. However, instead of carrying out these orders, Sanders and his men made their way into the forks of the creek swamp near Campbellton, where they waited for a chance to attack Newton and burn the courthouse there, which contained records of Sanders' previous service with the Confederate Army. The courthouse at Elba in adjacent Coffee County had been torched by a bushwhacker unit under the leadership of John Ward, and Sanders hoped to repeat their escapade in Newton. Accordingly, he set out for there on the night of the 14th of March 1865. Newton was also the location of the local Confederate conscription office, staffed at the time by Captain Joseph Breer, a former officer with the 15th Alabama Infantry who had been wounded at Gettysburg and returned home to lead efforts against local draft dodgers and deserters. This made it an even more tempting target for Sanders, who was seen as a traitor by the citizens of Dale County. Battle. Unbeknownst to Sanders, he and his men had been spotted on the roads leading toward Newton, and the probable destination had been guessed. Jesse Carmichael, a veteran of the 15th Alabama who had served as a corporal and lost a hand at Antietam in 1862, was notified by his father of Sanders' impending arrival in Newton that night, and he hastened to warn the town. The citizens formed up to defend the village. Carmichael and another wounded veteran of the 15th, John McIntyre, rode some distance outside of town to provide an early warning of Sanders' arrival. Spotting Sanders at the head of a mounted company of 44 men, Carmichael quickly rode back to Newton, where he led his neighbors to an ambush site he had chosen near a spring a mile east of town. However, once he had headed out on another reconnaissance mission, these men abandoned this position and returned to town, fearful for the safety of the families. Meanwhile, Breer and his Home Guard unit had arrived in Newton, and upon hearing what was happening, Breer immediately took charge of the town's defense. Breer wanted to keep the defenders close to the square, so that they might surprise Sanders and catch him amidst Newton's buildings and streets, leaving him less room to maneuver. Accordingly, he formed his men on the west side of the square, opposite of the direction that Carmichael believed that Sanders would be coming. Disagreeing with Breer's approach, and unable to dissuade him from this course of action, Carmichael took 9 of his friends and arranged them to the east of the square. Carmichael and 3 of the men took up positions near a hotel, while the other 6 formed up further down in a side street between the hotel and the square. Sanders and his company rode into Newton from the southeast at full gallop, yelling, "Huzzah! Huzzah! Here we are!" and heading for the courthouse. Carmichael and his outfit let them pass, then opened up on them from behind with double-barreled shotguns and rifles, while the friends up ahead simultaneously fired into the front of the attacking column. Thoroughly alarmed by this unexpected development, the attackers bolted for the edge of town and rode off into the night, reportedly hampered by malfunctioning pistols and rifles as they tried to return fire. A one-handed ex-corporal and his 9 friends had routed a Union cavalry force 4 times the size on foot and in the dark, without one of them being hurt or killed, and with Breer's men on the other side of the square never getting off a shot in the process. Sanders, for his part, reported 3 dead and 5 wounded among his troops. Aftermath. Sanders' actions in Alabama became the subject of an investigation in June 1865 when he returned to Pensacola after an unauthorized 4-month absence. He had been given 14 days for his mission, and when he returned after 4 months with only 8 men out of the 20 he started with, the Army demanded to know why. Sanders' proffered explanation seems to have satisfied his superiors, for no court-martial ensued, and he was permitted to resign at his own request and for the good of the service on the 13th of September 1865. After saying that he feared for the safety and welfare of his family, Sanders returned to Alabama after leaving the Army, where several citizens of Newton attempted to arrest him at his home but were repulsed, with one of them being killed in the process. He fled to Decatur County, Georgia, where his victim's father allegedly tracked him down and killed him. Though completely unimportant in terms of the war as a whole, Carmichael reported that the successful outcome of the Home Guard's minuscule engagement at Newton gave hope to local citizens, who had suffered much at the hands of raiders like Sanders and Ward. The town later constructed a monument to those of its citizens who defended it that evening, which can be seen adjacent to the square. In recent years, the battle has become an item of immense local interest, with an annual festival and reenactment on the 3rd weekend of October.